we are going to start with a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to hand it over to Margie Granado for that.
I would like to acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory of where I am, the Tongva First Nations, on which we're learning, working, and organizing every day. I think it's important to acknowledge the land because growing up here, I never heard the traditional names of our land. Indigenous people were talked about in the past tense, and all the struggles they faced were in the past tense as well. It's easier to deny Indigenous people their right if we historicize their struggles and simply pretend they don't exist. I would like to take this opportunity to commit myself and invite others to the struggle against systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands and denied their rights to self-determination, work that is essential to human rights work across this world. Please take a moment to put the name of your ancestral land in the chat, and welcome to our meeting.
All right, as you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Erica Jones. I am a member of the CTA board, but I'm also a kindergarten teacher. And I will be facilitating this amazing conversation with this amazing panel of amazing women. I can say amazing 3 times in a row. But I'm going to hand it off to them to introduce themselves, talk about how long they have, share their role in education, and how long they've been doing this work. So I can go ahead and hand it over. We'll start with Leslie, and then Leslie can popcorn to somebody else.
So hi, Leslie Littman, high school history teacher out of Santa Clarita. I have been teaching, or I've had my credential. I've been teaching for 30 years. I did the math, Margie, so that it was a year thing. And I am currently released to serve as your CTA Secretary Treasurer. And so I am going to turn it over to Miss Alex.
Hello, I am Miss Alex, and I am from Sacramento, California. I am a part of TRUE Educators, District D, and I am a middle school 7th and 8th grade teacher. You can already imagine how that's going right now during a pandemic. And I will pass that on to Yuri.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yuri Camacho, and I am currently a kindergarten teacher. I taught high school last year and reassigned to kindergarten. So you all know how that game goes. But I think it's important as far as who I am. I've been teaching for 16 years now, and I teach at Hopeville Unified School District over in Imperial County. And those who may not be familiar, Imperial County borders the Mexicali-Mexico border. On that, I'll go ahead and popcorn it over to Margie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Margie Granado. I am on the CTA Board of Directors. I represent an area in southeastern Los Angeles, but I am a kindergarten teacher, and I've been teaching for 37 years. And when we were talking before about the years, I was like, wow, how did that happen? And I'm telling you, it starts with 1 year, it jumps to 5, then before you know it, it's 37. And it's wonderful to be able to say that. It's also horrifying in the same moment, but because it's like 37 years, but the best years of my life every day, happy to come to school, happy to be with students. Currently on release for CTA, but miss the children daily.
All right, if I could just remind everyone to stay muted, that'd be great. Sometimes we get a little feedback. But let's just go ahead and jump into the questions. And
Did you introduce yourself?
I did. I did.
Okay.
I did. I've been teaching for, I did not do the math ahead of time. So I've been teaching since 2005. So I know it's not 30 years. Not yet.
Yep. Everybody started teaching on here when they were 2 years old. They're just so young.
All right, so let's jump into it. How has being a female educator impacted your role in education, activism within the community, and/or your involvement in CTA? And I know this is a big question, and we're going to just get into a great conversation right now.
I would love to start that off. As a Black American educator, there are so many challenges that are being posed against educators of color. And we have to meet the needs of our students. And then when we want to go above and beyond, we're often challenged with what we can and what we cannot do compared to other educators. But it's important that our students, regardless of the color, sees color representation throughout the sites or throughout the buildings of the district, because it allows the student to understand that everybody has a place and it's not just in one area, but it can be in all areas. That's my beginning of the take of that question. If somebody wants to add on to that.
I'll go ahead and go on. Initially, when I heard the question, it's overwhelming because the answer varies. And it varies where it could be a positive, and it can vary where it can be considered a disadvantage. So I just quickly kind of took notes and separated it for them. So in regards to how being a woman impacted my role in education, as someone who's had experience in K through 12, I also find it interesting how that changes depending what grade I'm teaching. So when I'm in the primary as a woman, I'm trusted, I'm respected. And I don't know if it's because they're younger children, so they see me as more as, like mom, caring, gonna take care of these children. But I noticed as I started to make my way up into middle school, and even in high school, that changed. Suddenly I was soft, too easy on them. My ability to discipline and classroom management was questioned. And mind you, I didn't have any issues in the elementary, neither in the secondary grade levels. But for whatever reason, I did notice that with regards to my colleagues that were also women and my colleagues who were not. So that was interesting for me. Regard to activism, same thing, depending on the spaces and what the topic was. But I also noticed that if I was, how can I say it? They were quick to say things like emotional, sensitive, triggered, angry. Yet when my colleagues that were men spoke in the same tone, gesture, they were passionate, they were dedicated, they were driven, right? And so it's just like, really? So again, that's where I talk about those advantages and disadvantages. But advantages is, one of my mentors, and she's in this space, I won't call her out, she'll know, told me, be the person that you needed, right? So as a teacher, I can spot those little girls that are already being told that they're bossy and be like, nah, child, you're assertive. You're a leader. Keep on speaking your truth, right? Even in kindergarten, I had a mother who was already coming in because that's how we're trained, right? We're trained that we're bossy if we're too outspoken or if we're taking charge. And I was like, I know she's bossy. And I was like, nah, she's a leader. She's not bossy. She's a leader, right? And just kind of giving her that support and so forth. So that's where I feel it can be an advantage, right? And the same thing goes when we're in those spaces of activism, spotting that other woman in the room, especially women of color. We all know that there's different rules there. And giving them that support, being that woman that we needed in those spaces prior, when maybe we were the only woman in that space, right? Now there's two, and then maybe it can be three. The last one with involvement in CTA. So for me, my experience as being a woman of color, not just a woman of color, is having to go a long list of check boxes and having to check them twice, thrice sometimes before I'm given any credit or consideration or valued for my commitment to my association, where those who are not women or women of color are sometimes allowed to skip steps or leave boxes unchecked and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know if that actually has a wrap up to it, but that's where my thought went with regards to that question.
It's amazing how in that question, which I mean, we could really talk about that for this question for hours and hours, but at the end of the day, is that the expectation of us, period, is there's more demand on what we need to do and how we need to do and how we need to achieve it, how we need to stand is harder on us than our counterpartner. And as long as we know this and we work together to keep encouraging and empowering each other, oh, we're going to get to the next step. Definitely.
So everything that Yuri said is absolutely an experience that I have had. Absolutely. There are always a set of rules for women in this organization and a whole bunch of passes for the men, if I could just get to that. So I think that for us, it's really to harness our energy, harness our relationships, and find ways to build our own fortress, or I don't know what we would like to call it, but a way of just moving together and just taking it on. Because, you know, we have to be together on this, because individually they really do. There have been moments that I felt very attacked and I didn't have a lifeline in the space. And other times I had allies in the room or other co-conspirators or just folks who had been through the same thing as myself, and we can push together. But it's really, everything we do has got to be strategic, because if you go out by yourself, you're going to get picked on by yourself. And really for us to hold the line and support each other. And really that's what's coming out of a lot of the work that we're doing here together, is finding ways to support each other and finding paths to get through all of the nonsense that might come before us. But to Yuri's point, so many years of kindergarten, the mom figure, eventually the grandma figure, whatever it is, and that's fine. But when I look at union advocacy work, I look at the members who work in elementary are treated so terribly different from members in high school. Oh, you can't do that with high school teachers, but you can do things to elementary teachers. So, you know, there are so many pockets in our advocacy work and even in our professional work that are impacted simply by being a woman. You're a woman, and we just are kind of find ourselves in places where we're either respected, disrespected, and even with respect, it's you know, it's a funky little line there, because, you know, to what level are we respected? But I just wanted to lift up every single thing that Yuri said in her words, because they mirror so much of what I've been through.
I just agree and want to echo what Margie said. I think that that's actually important for all of the things that you had said, but I think it's also important in the work that we do as CTA, because it takes it actually, when you actually look at elementary school teachers, they do tend to be female predominantly. And they don't have, in that level of education, the opportunity to earn the extra stipends that you get at the high school level and the secondary level. And so over the long term, that's a pay impact. When we talk about maternity leave, and you don't have enough sick days at the beginning ranked up to take the full time, you're losing service credit. And therefore then you're losing retirement pay. Or you have children and you're either a single parent or you're the primary caregiver or whatever that dynamic is, and that limits your ability to be active in the union. Because we in the union don't have places for your kids, and we've not allowed a space for them to be in that space. And that's, you know, increasingly problematic, because we are then losing the voice of that generation of teacher in the work that we're doing, and not actually then acknowledging all of the needs that folks have. But when you actually systemically put it together, while it looks like a uniform salary schedule, in fact, it actually isn't. And same with actually the work and all of the other things that go with it. And I think that that's also important to keep that in mind as we do the work to lift each other up in those spaces, but to lift up the women who are not in those spaces and are focused in some ways elsewhere.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's do some nuts and bolts here. Let's talk about the Women's Rights Committee. So I want to hand it over to Yuri to give the charge of the committee.
So yes, one of the roles that I've been honored with is to be the chair, current chair of the Women's Rights Committee. And the charge that which the Women's Rights Committee was tasked with is to promote women's involvement and role in leadership within the labor movement, as well as to promote women's history and to bring awareness to women's rights.
Yeah, and I know, one of the things that I just have to name is that this committee is a rather new committee. I know in my history within CTA, I didn't really find a lot of spaces that were specifically for women outside of caucus spaces, and let alone official advisory spaces. So I do want to hand it over to Leslie to talk a little bit more about how did this happen? How are we now in 2022 and we now finally have a Women's Rights Committee?
I think 2 years. Have we done this? It's been 2 years, I think. I don't know. It's pandemic years, so I don't know if it's a million years. In that sense, I'll be honest. I hear talk that we had one in the past and then it went away, and then it came back. And it would have been traditionally the Women's Advisory Committee, like we have ESP Issues Advisory, Large Urbans, et cetera, and the group of women that our inaugural committee members changed the name. And I think that that's actually really important to acknowledge that it is actually more than just advisory in the focus and in an attempt maybe down the road as to what we actually achieve and do. But I did notice as you go through the list that we are actually the majority of the workforce and yet aren't the majority of leadership and didn't have a formal voice in the system to actually raise concerns. And so we created it as a board action. And then what the women of the board did was work within each of their districts to find phenomenal women, many of whom are logged on here, who are also at different stages of their careers, so that we could make sure that all of the voices were there. Newer teachers, newer moms, veteran teachers, I don't want to say older women, but the issues change, and and what the responsibilities are change. But in the end, as we were talking about, caregivers, and what impact that has on the work, and then elementary, secondary, north, south, rural, urban. We tried to really just deliberately create a group of people where all voices could be heard, were represented and heard. So it's a mix also of women of color and white women, and did that to the focus. And then ultimately, the hope is we eventually maybe have a women's leadership event or conference, or that there's spaces for just women. And how we go forward and do that requires actually some thought and funding. And so down the road, but to build that and push for change in different ways.
And for those of you logging in, as far as CTA structure goes, this committee is advisory to the board, to the CTA board of directors, so they can make recommendations directly to the board for the board to act on. So it's definitely a really important step forward. But I love the fact that we have our secretary treasurer talking about the fact that we're going to have to put some money behind further investment in and uplifting women in this union. So that's amazing. But thinking about that and thinking about recommendations that would go to the board and just the conversations that this amazing group, amazing obviously is the word for the day with me, but that this group of superstars on this committee are talking through and discussing what are some of the recommendations and themes that you all are seeing coming out of those discussions.
I'll start. Okay, I'll throw it out there. I haven't been in all of the committee meetings, but I'll talk about my growth on actually a specific issue and where I think it lands and the work actually that needs to be done. And I'm sorry, Aisha, I'm going to throw you into the mix here, but Aisha started as a leader in Inglewood and would come to Bay Valley Service Center meetings with her two boys. And she'd be the only one with the two boys, and those, you know, and folks in the room would be like, "Why is she bringing the kids?" And I'll admit that I was one of them at a time. And it took a little bit. Okay, wait a second. Now I see it. And what the issue is, and how we actually work through childcare for those events. And we haven't gotten there yet, but it is an issue for leaders with young children. I know that there are folks in this space that have that, and how do we actually not even provide, because I think we can all be, I can't think of the word, it's not babysitters, but like we're there in the space that the kids can be in the space, and run around in the corner or sit at a table or do something, and that's the norm. And that's okay, because in the end, that's what builds the culture. I mean, it's not the same thing, but my grandparents would bring me and my brother every Saturday to temple. We didn't necessarily sit in the service the whole time, but we ran around that temple space as my grandmother was setting up in the back for, the meal, the lunch, and my grandfather was there, and you could go and that became actually that helped in the development of our religion and who we are in that family connection. And in essence, that's kind of what we need to do to build the next generation of union activists, is they actually need to sit there and absorb it. And we need to have our folks comfortable with kids being in that space, whether they're in that room or we've actually provided childcare in another room. That's, I think, an ongoing issue, and how we do that at all of the conferences. We have some that are there, but we have others where we just haven't done it, and we actually need to start pushing for it. And then we also need to figure out ways for how we do that, for just actually figure out ways to help and support moms or daughters when it's not just children. And in that piece, I don't have the answers to that yet, but that's that's the struggle also, as we go from being the child to being the parent of our parents. That's also the ongoing piece, because that ends up falling on the women in the family and not always the men. And then there's a whole bunch of other issues, but they can talk about it.
Well, I want to add on to kind of, I guess, continue what Leslie was bringing on, because it was something that I guess I knew I needed, but I didn't feel like I could put it out in the space. And that was that support about talking about when we, the children, then become the parent or the caregiver, right? Needing help with elderly care. And I apologize, I'm already getting emotional, because my whole world, I don't have siblings. So my whole world was.
Hold on, I'm just going to interrupt you. What we're not going to do is apologize today. In this space, we're not apologizing.
Which is another thing that kind of gets put on us, right, as women. So my whole world was my two parents, my dad's sisters who never married, never had children. That was my world. COVID came, swept through my house, and now it's just me and my dad. When COVID came, I was asymptomatic, no symptoms. My temperature never even went above 98.6. That wasn't the same story for the rest of my family. Mom immediately landed in the hospital. Dad fought for his life in the house. And my two aunts were forced to quarantine on their own. One was 81, and the other one was 92. And all that was now on my shoulders. And I also had to be quarantined. Mind you, even in all of that, I felt that I couldn't complain because I'm not a mother. I don't have children. And I'm not knocking mothers, right? And I think that's part of that thing that's also out there. You know, what you hear a lot is, I don't know how mothers do it. And honestly, I don't know how mothers do it. But what we don't hear is those of us who are tasked to take care of our elderly relatives. We don't hear that. And therefore, I didn't think I was allowed to put that out in their spaces. After my story came out and people knew what I was dealing with, I had especially women come out to me like, Yuri, all this time and you didn't say anything? Because I didn't feel that I had that right. I don't have young ones that I'm taking care of. I'm taking care of adults. And so in these forums, for me, it was quite liberating to hear other women talk about how that's tasked on us too, and how we need that support. Because again, that's also preventing us from being in spaces and so forth. And so I just wanted to echo that last part, because now I saw myself in those forums and I didn't even realize it. And so now I make it a point to bring that up in equal amount as we talk about women with young children or adolescents and so forth. Like we're caretakers, right? That's I think what's the highlighted part, whether it's those that are younger than us or those that are older than us. But definitely there's a need to support us because we tend to take on that role as caretaker and all that entitles. Going to be a lots of deep breaths type of conversation, just saying. So you're going to see me breathe out a lot. Just throwing that out there too.
And that's okay, because again, I personally don't have children, but life presents you with different opportunities. We'll call them opportunities. My brother passed away, had 6 children, one with Down syndrome. My privilege to be able to take care of him. My privilege to still be able to take care of my father. These are things, you know, they're honors to be able to do these things, but it's tough. It is tough at times. And I rely on a network of folks that are geographically by me, but not everybody is that fortunate. And I often rely on my union brothers and sisters, because trust me, it is a family. It is a family. Even if you just are like, I just got to, leak out some of this emotion, people are there. And I think that that's a wonderful thing about us coming together or us building relationships, because I grew up in a family like, we don't talk about that. It's like, Bruno, for real? We don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about our family. Nobody needs to know what's going on. It's a beautiful house. It wasn't that beautiful. I've lost members to drug abuse. I've lost close family members to substance abuse, all kinds. And I had a lot of shame with that type of information. But the more I shared it, the more I found that it wasn't just my story, and there was nothing to be ashamed of or anything. And in spite of it, or because of it, I'm the person who I am today. And I think that brings us to a point in our work that we can advocate for people who are going through the same thing. And I think that's a lot of what this committee can do and what we can do to serve our members and other leaders and help them to come up in this system of leadership. But also in education, professionally, just knowing that folks carry a lot of stuff and women still get shit done. Let me just say that. We can have all this going on, but we are going to get the shit done because it has to get done. Failure is not an option. I was told that as a young child. Why are you crying? Don't cry. You go cry. Come on, let's just keep going. And because it just has to get done. That's, the option. You can cry. Here's the tissue. Go ahead. Just keep crying. But we're going to help you, see you through and get you through. And really, that's my message to everybody. It's tough at times, But we've all walked the path, maybe not exactly the same path, and we're here to help walk you through and pull you through and bring you up.
So I want to add to, well, I don't want to add, I just want to pull out some keywords that I was hearing during the time that everybody was talking. Building relationships. Right now, that's key. We need that, especially how the pandemic, COVID, has impacted us all. Being in that space to allow ourselves to build a relationship. And since you're here today, that lets us know that you're willing to build a relationship with us. Your story, how your story, your personal story impacts us all. It helps us. It gives us our own aha moments. Not only that, it allows us to understand if she can put her story, lay it down for me to hear, I have a story too. And I know that my story can help somebody else here in this space. Advocate. We have to advocate for change. In this space, once again, promotes that. And then my favorite, women still get the shit done. Let's go, y'all. Let's go. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And that's something we definitely got to remember.
Okay, so first of all, just listening to all of y'all, like I wish I had a list of things behind me where I could just check, like, oh, me too, me too, me too. And even just like looking at, you really have me thinking about my own trajectory as well. And I'm coming at this as a participant who's been part of your forums, not necessarily a member of the committee. And I can tell you, hearing things that people feel comfortable sharing in the forums has been really critical. But one of the things I just want to lift up a couple of things. So Leslie talked about bringing kids. So I was that kid who came to union meetings, but my dad brought me, and my dad was never questioned at all. At all. I was allowed to sit at the table with the people. I was allowed to be in the training. I was allowed to raise my hand and say whatever I wanted to say. And I was never questioned, and he was never questioned. So it's definitely something that right now I'm like, that's interesting, right? Like, and then also just I think one of the things, just uplifting the pandemic and uplifting like everything you went through, Yuri, where again, like check boxes, people, we're seeing more and more of our members who are caregivers now, who were not caregivers at the beginning of the pandemic, and how that has shifted and how their lives and roles have shifted. So when people were talking about going back in person, it was a much more layered conversation for women who were automatically in that role as caregivers, right? And then I really also just want to shout out how, again, like when you broke it down right now, Miss Alex, about like sharing your stories and telling your stories. I know many of us have been super vulnerable about our stories and putting it out there. And one of the biggest things that ends up happening is other members are like, oh my gosh, thank you for sharing your story, because your story is my story. So just really appreciating that these type of spaces are so critical. And how do we continue to do that within the union and make sure we're creating these spaces? But we all know it hasn't been rosy. Let's think about these barriers. Let's think about these blockades that have been put in your way. So I want you to think about what unique barriers or challenges do women face in our union? And what do you think we can do about it? And whose responsibility is it to do something about it?
So I just want to piggyback off of what you said before we go into that question, because that's, and I guess I'll put it in the room at this point, is I think as the white woman in this space today, that it's important when we're telling stories that we as white women don't expect women of color to be forced to share their story so that we grow. And we force that piece from you and say, well, why? I don't understand. And that becomes absolutely essential in the work that we as white women do in this organization. And I think that we have to acknowledge that while we as women in general have been blocked by men in leadership roles and experiences, that we also at times block each other from leadership roles and experiences, and we all need to do better with that. And I think that that's actually really important for us to be able to do the work and understand what happens in a space and why it affects people differently, but not have the expectation that those folks who got impacted have to explain it to us. And I think that that's actually really important for all of us to grow and to understand when we want to make sure that we're lifting voices up. And so I think that there are times where we as women do the damage. And there are times where we are victims of the system where the bias tends to be vote for the man. In a race between a man and a woman, even if the woman is way more qualified, the instinct is to vote for the man and go with the default. And you have to sometimes call that out to make sure that when people go into the voting booth, that they remember that. And then that becomes really important because sometimes that actually is also a barrier.
Now, you just dropped she just dropped it on the, that was a lot. That's a lot. That was that crab pot that you got your corn, your potato, your sausage, your crab meat. She just threw it all there on the table, y'all. So I'm just going to pick one piece out of there. And what I want to say is, I truly thank you for how you started out with the comment of there should not be an expectation a woman of color to tell the story. And then if we tell our story, the question is why or how or when and where. So I really appreciate that you brought that to attention because for me, that's very, very big. I do want to say, depending on what age range you are as a color educator, dictates your interpretation of the comments that were just made from you. So as an older woman of color, I can appreciate it. I look at it in a different lens. But maybe as a younger woman of color, they wouldn't even understand because their struggle is not my struggle. And I think that's key for all of us because each one of our struggles are different and it deals with our age, it deals with the experience that we've gone through. And I just want to say thank you for the way you presented that part. So like I said, I was just taking a little piece out of the crab pot. Y'all can go ahead with the moving.
There's like Miss Alex mentioned, there's a lot there in that question as well. The first thing that came to my mind is about the overcoming it. And then the first thought that came on that part was I had the great opportunity of hearing Madam Vice President Kamala Harris speak long before she was Madam Vice President. And she was kind of telling her story. And the part that really resonated with me was she was saying how when she was sharing, she was, talking to her mom, feeling herself about being the first woman in certain spaces, especially first woman of color in certain spaces. And her mom replied with the thing of like, it's great to be the first, but it's more important to make sure you're not the last. And that part, that was years ago. I think it's almost a decade ago, if I want to do the math. And that to this day still sits with me. Because unfortunately, as women, and more so as women of color, there's still places out there for us to be first in, which is sad. That's a whole nother story. But again, remembering, celebrate when you get there, for sure. Call your friends, all your, girlfriends, moms, grandmas, all of that. But it's also like, just repeating what her mama told her, it's more important to make sure you're not the last. And I think sometimes that, we fought so hard to get there. We sometimes forget to make sure that, we don't just leave the door open, but that we're out there reaching out and pulling them through with us. It's cool you leave that door open for others to follow you. But we've all been there. We know it's not that simple of just having the door open, because they will put everything and some to prevent you from walking through that open door. So that's what I'm going to throw out in that space as just one small piece on the overcoming the obstacle part. But as y'all know, I see a lot of people nodding heads. There's a lot more to it than just that, but that's the part that just came first to mind on that question.
I think you have to be really decisive as you come up to make sure that you are explicitly helping other folks navigate spaces, navigate organizations, breaking it down, and pulling them along and up with you. And I think that it doesn't happen organically necessarily. You really need mentors in the organization. You really need folks that are going to be real with you. And unfortunately, sometimes, you have to be told, avoid this or avoid that, which is a whole other can of worms, is that for us to be in safe spaces and able to be successful in leadership, there are certain places or folks or spaces that we need to be told to avoid, because they won't help us, because any little thing that we do wrong is going to be magnified. So I've got this rule. I'll remember half of the things you say, but I'm going to remember everything you do. So everything I do wrong, I'm sure is going to be blown up. I've seen it done for every woman who's come before me, that they can make one mistake and it's going to be blown up. But any mistake that a man makes, he's going to be given one of those special hall passes that I talked about earlier. Maybe he'll get two. So, I think that those are pieces in the organization, as we go forward and as we leave this and think, well, what can I do to help other folks? Really just look at being very intentional on how we help folks navigate systems and be very honest about it. And just, I'm going to leave it right there.
Yeah. So, I think there's like so many nuggets that you've all said that I could just like literally sit and let me just think about that for a second, right? And let me just really unpack that. I'm also thinking about the fact that this is, Women's History Month. During Women's History Month, we have seen Supreme Court nomination process and confirmation process where you had a woman of color who was way overqualified than the last person who got confirmed for the Supreme Court. Display such grace in a situation where, I'll just pull from the Oscars, she might have wanted to just go up on stage and slap somebody, but she didn't. So with that, I just like this whole month has been heavy, and I want to name that heaviness. And so we've got about 15 minutes, and we do want to get some questions from the audience. So folks, start thinking about your questions. But I do want to throw this question out to you. What is heavy on your hearts right now? And I want to throw this out because as women, when we show up in spaces, we show up with our whole self, all the layers. So what's heavy on your hearts?
So for me, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay. So for me, I am feeling the inequities that our women in our spaces are experiencing. And I recognize this huge need for men in our organization to just step back and receive some information. And I'm thinking recommendations on how do we recommend that folks learn how to listen. Listening doesn't mean that you go after somebody. Listening doesn't mean you respond to everything. Listening sometimes means just sitting. Sit with the information and try to process it. Ask questions that aren't going to hurt people. But for me, that's heavy for me because I see so many times folks just don't listen and they assume a crazy intention or just don't process the information and people are harmed. So for me, I just really want us to sit, and I really want the organization as a whole to do better, but specifically men in the organization. And I'm not male bashing. I'm just saying, based on some experiences I've had recently, for them to really learn how to listen, and it's okay to not respond. I mean, I just need something like that to start happening, because we become a collateral damage when men don't get stuff because they are in leadership and they predominantly are in power.
So what I was gonna say with regards to what's heavy on my heart, and then also, going on what Erica mentioned with regards to the confirmation process of justice. Sorry, I'm already getting emotional. That was hard to watch. Went through so many emotions. And I know the women in this room, every single facial expression that she made throughout that entire process, we all been there. We knew exactly what she felt in that moment. And I remember times, I'm kind of laughing too, because I don't know how many times I turned off the TV, changed the channel, came back, because there was moments when I'm like, are we making a difference? Is it ever going to change? And then personal to me, who am I kidding myself? I mean, look at this woman. Amazing, right? The word of the hour, right? And then there's me. And so, it's like, what? And then I think about the little girls in my classroom. What about them? Even the parts where she couldn't even show just pure happiness either, like when the tear rolled down her eye, that was another moment for me. She knew, like we all know, God forbid we cry, right? We not only can't get angry, we also can't cry, because that's a whole nother story whole nother narrative. I know somebody asked that question in the chat. That's a whole nother narrative that they'll be quick to push us into, right? If we're not angry, we're too emotional. Whatever fits their narrative to make us unqualified or not equipped for the job, right? So that's what was heavy on my heart, particularly, unfortunately, especially in the month of Women's History Month, was like, I wouldn't say that I completely lost hope. I mean, I'm still here today, right? As all of us are. But that was weighing really heavy on my heart this month. Like, are we really seeing progress? Or are we just going to continue to repeat this same cycle generation after generation? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to add another layer to that. And I see folks in the chat. I think one of the things is this whole idea that when we enter spaces of activism or when we enter spaces of politics, there's this idea of respectability that we have to maintain. And I think if it's one of the things that the uprising after the murder of George Floyd showed us, and even actually going back to the murder of Mike Brown, one of the things that I have really appreciated from the women in the BLM movement is it is okay to show up how you are in all of your rage. It is okay to show up like that. And I think what I'm noticing is a disconnect where it's okay for us to show up in our rage on the streets, but it is not okay for us to show up in our rage in spaces like Supreme Court hearings or the Union Hall.
So I have to chew on all that has been brought, because for me, mine's is more personal, as an attack for who I am and what I stand for. And I refuse to let my voice be silenced. But I've learned to smile and play the politics that dictates how I should present my words. Because when you are a colored woman and you challenge the status quo, you're labeled quick and easy, and you can change your voice and you're that mad Black woman, but you have not seen me get mad yet because my tone just changed just a little bit. I do not waver when I know that we're being mistreated. I am truly a fighter, and I've been fighting all my life. I've been fighting since I was in elementary, and my story runs deep with scars of hate and racism. But even through all of that, I learned how to love regardless. So just in hearing and taking in that all that has been said, my anger is here. And I do want to explode it out, but I have learned that sometimes you just gotta sit and watch and create a plan that when you do react, that is going to be for the outcome that is going to make a change, and you have to take time to plan it out. I am thankful that we've had this opportunity to come together, and my emotions are very high, and I will continue to process what I do and continue to stand for those who can't stand, and be a voice for those who don't have a voice. And I refuse, no matter how hard they attack me, I'm gonna stand. And this smile is gonna be here, because 9 out of 10, they would want me to smile because they don't want to see that other part. But that's what's on my heart. The anger that's built inside, and making sure that when it comes out in a manner that is effective, that is gonna challenge, that is gonna make a change, not that it destroys or demoralizes, because that's what they wanna see. I'm good trouble. You always got to have that one. That's the good trouble. Gretel got a whole lot of stuff in there. Thank you, Gretel.
I wanted to see if there was a quick, let's first of all, let's just take a collective breath. All right, now I do see okay, so I'm looking at Gretel's question. How do we navigate how women are narrated, and especially how BIPOC women are narrated about how they communicate. And we kind of talked a little bit about that. And then how do we, so I think part of it is, I guess in that question is, how do we create a space where you can show up with your full self? I think that's really like, how do we make the spaces we are in, as far as our union work, spaces that you can show up in your full self? And I don't have the answer to that one. Maybe someone else on the panel does, because I think it's really pointing to the work we have to do, but I can't even name a place right now on this planet where women can show up in their like authentic selves. I can't really, I mean, unless it's at home with your girls, right? With your people. Yeah. Thoughts, folks. And then we'll do a little wrap up.
I agree. I don't understand. How long we've been wearing a mask for the pandemic? And so some of us been able to take it off, but we still got it on. And let's talk about when we had a mask on before we even had the pandemic. How many of us have sitting here, we've been carrying this mask on our face constantly. You go to work, you come home, the mask is still on. And I don't even think when you get home, you're able to take the mask unless you go in the bathroom, you shut the door. So I don't think we've gotten to that part where we can take our mask down unless we're in a very isolated private space. But now we got additional layers of masks because the pandemic has placed these additional layers compared to layers we already had. So as we're moving through the pandemic, we're moving through the struggle of pulling down these masks. Yeah, that's a good one.
I think in some ways is we have to actually build the relationships and schedule the time where you do. I mean, I do think that actually the one thing that was interesting with this state council schedule was actually building time in for meals. And what that kind of led to, which was just actually sometime, no matter how bad the food was, Aisha, or others that were commenting on it, but to actually sit down in that space for whatever, maybe that was a half hour, and actually just talk and not be worried about, let's start the committee meeting. And I think that actually was, that's something actually to consider keeping. Where there isn't maybe an agenda, and we do actually build in that moment to build the relationships and get to know each other. And I think that that's actually really helpful, so that when we do share stories, that we're comfortable sharing stories in that space and know that folks understand where that's coming from and why that person reacts that way or says that thing, and and others can explain it to other people who maybe are new to that space. And then I also think that what's also important is, as women, especially in women leaders, and some are better at it than others, but I think you go back to what came out of the Obama White House and women and what they did in that White House, because every time a woman spoke up in that White House and said something, nobody heard it. And then a man said the same exact thing and got credit for it. Until the women started to say, well, Yuri had this great idea and she said this, or Margie had that fantastic idea and she said that. And that then started to sink in as to who actually said it in the first place. And then you couldn't actually, somebody else couldn't take credit for it. And we all have to really be deliberate in, no, that person said it two people ago. Or they said it, they said it yesterday, or they said it again and again, because I mean, we've all been there where you say something and And literally you've gone into this detailed explanation and the next person asks a question about what you have just spent the time explaining. And it actually burns when that person who does that is a woman. And so, we just need to be mindful as to lifting up those voices and just no, they're not intense and they're not mean or they're not loud. They're passionate about the issues and they just, and that's who they are. Get to know them. They're not scary. And just kind of go forward and do that. And all spaces, the only way we can grow is to actually challenge ourselves, and take risks and be afraid at times. But you also gain a tremendous amount by doing that. And I think that, you have to just lay out the path and hope that you get there. And who I've said it, like, I don't know, in every phone call conversation, which has been nonstop the past 3 days, who I am as a leader today is not who I was as a leader 30 years ago, and or 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And who I am as a leader next year is going to be different, and 4 years down the road is going to be different. And then and 4 years after that, I'm not going to be a leader anymore. I'm going to be retired, but I'm going to lead something else. But that's just that's important. And to also, I think that what we also as women don't do, and that's also part of our problem, is we don't state we did this. Men do it really easily. I was this, I was that, I was this, I was that, and they get credit for it. And we a lot of times work behind the scenes and do things that actually gets the job done that the men take credit for. And we don't actually acknowledge that work. Or it's something you can't put on a list of things, but you're the one that got the job done. And that's harder to quantify, and that's in some ways harder for people to see. And we have to figure out ways to actually shine the light on that, because that's also important.
I want to say, I kind of chuckled a little bit when Leslie brought up the example of the women in the Obama administration. And I chuckled because I'm like, you don't need to go that far out for an example, because for me, it's the women on the board of CTA. It's the women like Leslie that are officers for CTA. Those women brought me up, right? Those women are saying all the things that Leslie just brought up, right? They're the ones that are pointing these things out, addressing them in whichever way they need to be addressed, and also reminding us, own your work, right? Speak your truth. Call it for what it is. Again, I have to take that moment to acknowledge, again, the women that have gone before us, kept those doors open, pushed men aside and said, let them be them, right? If needed to. Hold us back if we felt we were falling back. Pulled us out. All the adjectives and verbs you want to put out there. So I just wanted to put that out there in that space, because for me, that's you. And I'm saying that to the women in these squares. So thank you for that.
So I want to acknowledge that we are over time, and I also want to acknowledge that time does not control us. So it is okay that this conversation needs to go on a little longer, and it is also okay that if you only could be here till 5 and have to leave, we get it. But I would like the rest of the panelists to have a chance for a last word before we close it out.
Leslie made a point about the meals, and I think what that speaks to is we're not used to being together at all anymore. And having time, we always seem to be following the clock, like Erica just pointed out. It's okay to spend some time checking in with people, having a conversation. Our work gets better when we know each other and have relationships and develop relationships. And I think that it's not overrated. I think the relationship piece is highly important in the work that we do. And I know that we've been starved during the pandemic, and it's been very good to come back in person for these conferences. It's been very good to come in person for state council. I mean, there's good times, there's bad times, but the fact of the matter is when we're together, we can be more authentic. We can be ourselves, because this whole video streaming, Zooming, it's just not the same. It's different. And I think that it gives us an opportunity to really connect with folks and just appreciate them. And I just appreciate everybody who gave up their afternoon to be here. And I can't wait till we're in the same physical space to connect with you and appreciate you in person. So thank you for being here.
My last thought, I want to start off by uplifting the following name. Dina Imelda Carlon Camacho. That's my mom, the woman that gave me life. I'm not trying to recite a Tupac song for y'all about, but we all came from a woman, right? And I feel like it's that simple. It's that simple. So I have to repeat her name again. And I would encourage all of us to lift up our mother's names, because none of us would be here without them, period. Dina Imelda Carlon Camacho. And thank you for allowing me to lift up that name here.
Do a panel. It'll be fun. It'll be great. March sucks, Yuri, and I'll tell you why. Because of the same reason. Ann Littman, March 18th, 2006. And her mom, Rose LeBeau, March 18th, 2002. And then my other grandma, who got sick in March but passed away in April of 2004, who taught me that family is important, service is important, friends are important, and just standing up for what's right is always important.
You know, I have to be the difficult one on this, right? You know, I had to add something different. So yes, March definitely is a rough month, especially this day. When my son, 2017, was diagnosed with a rare form of kidney cancer on this day, and the doctors gave him 2 years, he had marked the 189th person in the world to have such cancer, and he demised the following year, 1 week after his birthday in April. So I have to say my son's name, Isaiah Miguel Alexander, because he was my anchor and my monarch butterfly that always told me, beautiful, what you gonna do next?
All right, I'm jumping in this. In a very similar but different vein to Miss Alex. March 17th was the day my pregnancy ended. And his name was Jackson Dean Crawford. Okay, March sucks.
I think we need to do this in person next time at the bar so we can get a drink, because y'all know I'm keeping this real, right?
Yes.
Wow.
March.
Go
Margie.
for it, Margie.
That was just Aisha. I was just saying March may suck, but you guys don't. You guys thrive and you inspire, you lift up, you create new paths, you rebuild broken ones. And not just you, but the folks in the audience, you know, who've been able to navigate all these spaces. as allies or, as frontliners. And it is a heavy month, and I just really value your willingness to share your truths and your vulnerability, because I think you're modeling what we need more of. That's what we need more of, and that's how we're going to continue to transform the spaces that we're in. And because the more we do it, the more we're going to crave it, and the more we crave it, we're going to create it. And then we're going to continue to do it. And it just becomes the norm. It becomes the dominant. It becomes the fish water that we're all swimming in. So you all are an inspiration to me, and the folks I'm sure watching this. And just thank you for being honest and sharing your time with us tonight, and all the service and time that you spend on the union side in your advocacy roles. Just thank you all for being here. And if there's did I miss anything, Erica?
I didn't know if Margie wanted to say anything.
Margie, yeah.
I was going to call out today's date, March 28th, 2022, for us having this opportunity to be together and to move forward, and just to thank you all for bringing the energy, just like Aisha said. But this is a moment for us now to look at what we're going to do beyond today, and just, take anything any nugget that you gained today, and do something to help somebody else navigate, have a better day, just to be kind, just be you, and do something great for somebody else.
That's perfect. Making
All right,
her story, y'all.
Yeah, making her
story
story
today. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here, and have a good night. Bye.
Good night. Buenas noches.
Good night, everyone.
Woo.
Right? I said a lot of deep breaths today.
I know. Hey, Lisa.
Those guys that stuck it out, man.
I was gonna just end abruptly, but it didn't feel right. Are y'all good? Are you guys okay? How are you feeling? I feel like we need a collective drink now.
You know what?
I had no idea we was going down this train. I thought we was going to a different route. Look at, woo. I got emotion.
Train decided.
Yeah.
It is, but it's healing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's healing.
Yeah, this was awesome. This was worth having 3 screens up in the classroom. But yeah, this was beautiful. It's not even words, really.
What are you doing? Great, that's my dog.
But I was like, wait a minute.
I wanted to ask.
I thought you had a cat.
I'm sorry, I have a puppy who's obviously
that was
chewing something.
I have a cat. My cat's bigger than her puppy.
I know there were times, Margie, when that tail started going across the screen, it was hysterical.
It would have made a bigger deal for me to put her down, because she would have jumped right back up, and it's like, just let her pass.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take a picture of the screen.
Oh, that's what I was gonna ask. Perfect.
So
Yes.
you guys say,
Let me hear,
Lisa, your pictures, we're just 2 little thumbnails, Lisa, but I'm gonna she just moved
gonna take
herself.
mine
You're gonna move yourself. Okay, I'm gonna move
Yeah,
mine too.
I'm
I don't want to see my name here though.
Oh, you want us to take our names out?
No. I was just trying to move
Oh.
mine from the screen. All right, there we go. Okay, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it. Very nice. All right, approved. Except I got my stinking thumbnail, but I can cut that off. Okay. Any final words or anything? You guys feel good about how that went? You guys are awesome.
All good. You didn't know what you walked into today, Aisha. I know
No, you didn't. You had no idea.
I had no idea, and it went exactly how it was supposed to go.
Yeah.
It went
Yeah.
exactly how it was supposed to go. So
Yeah.
thank y'all. Sometimes it's good to just not know, and sometimes it's not good to not. So thanks for working with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Appreciate
Good
that.
night.
Okay, good
Good
night.
All right.
Thank you,
Good night,
guys.
folks. Good night.
Bye.
Good to
Bye.
see y'all again. Goodbye. Have a good weekend. Be safe.
Bye.
All right, bye.